Today, I'm going to talk about the remarkable vampire film Nosferatu, how it was made so beautifully, and the haunting message I found hidden in the darkness. Hey, I'm Loren, your insider to filmmaking techniques. What makes Nosferatu and all of director Robert Eggers' films so captivating is their deceptive simplicity. On the surface, they resemble fairy tales with straightforward plots. Like the best fairy tales, these stories are rich with deeper meanings and invite countless interpretations. But unlike fairy tales, Nosferatu is not a story for kids. It's a cautionary tale for adults. Beneath its beautiful Gothic surface lies a web of conflicts, which I find lead to one central illuminating theme, which I'll lay out for you now. The original Nosferatu debuted in 1922, not long after World War I, during a time when Europe was gripped by fear of the plague.
Like every plague, its sole desire is to consume all life on Earth.
Count Orlok, the vampire, embodies this fear. He's a symbol of sickness and death from the Spanish flu that ravaged Europe. In this film, Orlok brings the plague to the fictional town of Wiesberg, Germany, with devastating consequences. But to me, the plague also symbolizes European society in the 1800s, a culture plagued by greed, repression, and inequality. The film critiques the exploitation of the poor by aristocrats, and particularly the treatment of women as property.
Come to me, a spirit of comfort, anything.
In this version of Nosferatu, Ellen, the main protagonist, is the one who summons the evil vampire. She grows up lonely on a farm with just her father, and pleads with her connection to the spirit realm for sexual desire and companionship. And the lullaby playing in the background while she's asking for this shows how naive she is about the consequences of her actions.
As if my spirit wanders off.
Throughout this film, there are lots of slow, methodical camera moves. They feel to me almost like Ellen's spirit, searching for something, uncovering things. The camera moves have this feeling of inevitability, as we're slowly discovering shot by shot what comes next. It's suspenseful and beautifully executed. And these moves often create interesting camera transitions like this one. You can see the camera moving from Ellen's bed up the wall, and then cut to a camera moving at a similar speed, now looking down on the town, a total change in perspective. It's a clever way to jolt the viewer, to make things feel chaotic, while keeping a sense of almost hypnotic momentum towards something ominous. The film revolves around life and death. Orlok, a centuries-old vampire, clings to survival by feeding off the blood of others. His decaying body is masked by the guise of a wealthy aristocrat, complete with fine garments like this oversized sheepskin cloak, trying to hide his true nature. To me, Orlok represents greed and the corruption of wealth, feeding on the weak and exploiting those less fortunate. In contrast, Ellen, played brilliantly by Lily Rose Depp, is a young woman with a dying spirit, suffocating by societal expectations. She spends most of the film with a look on her face of someone who is barely alive, someone who is deeply repressed.
Does evil come from within us or from beyond?
Ellen is half with us and half with another realm, and the lighting throughout the film of people half in light, half in shadow works perfectly to illustrate all of their inner conflicts. The main plot starts with Ellen's husband Thomas, who's trying to get a promotion at his real estate firm, and is assigned to visit the Count at his faraway estate. And I love this shot when Thomas first arrives at the office, that giant black door right in the middle of frame, an obvious foreshadowing of the darkness he's about to enter.
A new husband
requires new wages.
You're too generous, sir.
And the next frame is also beautifully designed. I love how the color of Thomas's clothes blend in with the decor of the room, making the frame feel simple, and that helps his face stand out to keep our attention. And of course, I love the symbolism of Thomas passing by the butcher who's butchering right outside, because on this journey to the Count, Thomas is dead meat. But it's this scene on his journey to the castle when he meets the empty carriage that really stands out to me as a turning point in the story. This is probably the most beautiful scene in the film. I think what makes this scene feel so magical is its stunning simplicity, and that comes from the super stylized lighting. Look at how white the snow on the ground looks, and how jet black the trees right next to it are. There's barely any gray in between. And the deep background is almost the exact same color as the snow in the foreground, making the film feel graphic with basically just two colors. The shape of the road making a perfect cross at the intersection is obviously deliberate, and all the lines in the frame lead the eye nicely towards Thomas. For this level of controlled design and lighting, I think they must have filmed it in a studio, with just the dirt path as the ground, and the trees and the background environment added in digitally. The trees don't move at all in the wind, so this whole environment could just be a matte painting, or art that someone drew, which would be a lot cheaper than going out into the forest, creating the perfect space, and adding giant cranes with expensive lights to create those light shafts in the background. And the horses and carriage approaching were probably filmed separately on a backlot dirt road with a giant blue wall behind them, and then digitally inserted into the shot, because the distance they had to travel were probably too far for a soundstage. And they did film most of this movie on a soundstage in Prague, one of Europe's largest studios, and that gave them the flexibility to move ceilings and walls around so they could create these long, epic camera shots. They also lit these scenes almost entirely from the natural light of fire and flames, something very hard to do with these giant film cameras because they require so much light to show up on the print. So to get around this problem, Panavision developed custom high-speed lenses just for this film, which absorbed a lot more light than traditional lenses, making this all possible. And this allowed the director of photography, Jarin Blaschke, the ability to create these mesmerizing, uniquely stylized shots, with most of the lighting behind the characters. And I mean directly behind, not off to the side. There are several reasons for this. Take this shot, for example. First, putting a character directly in front of a light puts them in shadow, making them look and feel dark, which is a huge point of emphasis of this story, which I'll get back to later. Second, the character and the light overlapping creates super high contrast, which draws our eye there. In other words, the lightest part of the frame is right next to the darkest part of the frame. If a super bright light is on one side of the frame and our character on the other side, where does our eye go? Overlapping them ensures that our eye looks naturally to where the drama is. Third, the production designer makes a point to keep the environment simple. This frame is a good example. You see some simple elements of Gothic architecture with the cracks in the stone and a couple of round pillars, but it's all basically one faded color, keeping the frame around the character subdued and minimalist. This shot is super interesting because they use the fire in the background to pass the focus from one character to the next seamlessly. You see how Thomas stays right in front of the fire in frame until he stops just as the Count is coming into frame on the other side of the fire. They use what we call a rack focus, meaning the focus changes from one character to the next to help shift our focus as well. And the rest of the room is bare. The props and the background materials are all basically the same color. The entire frame is basically just one color. It's hard to make a frame look this simple and yet still tell a story with complex undertones. Remember this shot I mentioned before about how the color of Thomas's clothes matched the background? That's basically done throughout the whole film. The color palette is mainly just golden browns from the flames and blues from the moonlight. It's a contrast of a cold exterior fueled by a fiery emotional center, and it's portrayed brilliantly through the use of color, light, and contrast. This type of minimalist surrealism, the dramatic angles, the hazy atmosphere, the distortions in perspective, these are all great tools to evoke the feeling of a nightmare taking place.
Anna.
But speaking of nightmares, I kept coming back to this carriage scene in the forest as a turning point in the film. It felt significant to me the way the door opens by itself, inviting Thomas to enter. I think by now Thomas knows how bad of an omen this is for him, and yet he still approaches. And then when he gets right up to the door, look, you can see him floating in the rest of the way. He probably stepped on some kind of treadmill device, and it was clearly done on purpose. So my question is, why did he continue, and what is this ominous scene trying to tell us? To answer that, I looked at two different things going on. First, Count Orlok is often invisible, with just his shadow showing up. And the driver here is clearly invisible, if there is one at all. And second is the force that pulls Thomas the rest of the way into the carriage. I think, in this film, Thomas is driven by an invisible force. The force of Nosferatu.
You are lost in his shadow.
No!
But really, it's the societal pressure put on him, in this case to get that promotion. Even later on in the castle, with his life in total danger, Thomas doesn't leave. This moment encapsulates his internal struggle. He knows the danger, but is powerless against the weight of his own ambition and fear of failure. Before I continue, just a real quick reminder. If you're enjoying this video, please hit that like button below and make sure you're subscribed to my channel. And as always, leave a comment. I would love to talk more about Nosferatu. Almost every main character in this film has powerful invisible forces tormenting them. Orlok embodies pure desire.
I am an appetite.
His need for blood and lust for Ellen driving him. So much so that he lets the sunlight kill him for every last drop of her. Ellen's desire is for agency and connection that leads her to summon Orlok in the first place. Thomas is trying to prove his masculinity, with mixed results at best.
Why have you killed these beautiful flowers?
Let us put them in water.
They will only die in a few days. Throw them out.
What?
Throw them out!
I love her reaction here. The flowers, a traditional symbol of love and care from her husband Thomas, are probably the one bit of vibrant color we see in the entire film, and she hates them. Ellen doesn't care about short-lived band-aids to her real problems. She just pledged herself to Orlok for all of eternity. Bright and cheery flowers for a few days are meaningless in comparison. The flowers are a symbol of society not taking Ellen seriously, and she knows that feeling all too well.
Untie this child at once!
But Dr. Von Franz, played by the great William Dafoe, is different. Having no invisible forces or preconceived notions driving him, he sees reality as it truly is. He realizes that Ellen must use her sexuality to lure Orlok away from destroying the town.
She is the way.
And to make that happen, the Doctor must challenge everyone else's rigid beliefs.
If we are to tame darkness, we must first face that it exists.
And his layered, cloaked shoulders, to me, are a fitting symbol for his role, peeling back the layers of each character's struggles and desires in order to manipulate events for the greater good, which I won't get into now, but he does it really well.
We must know evil to be able to destroy it. We must discover it within ourselves.
In the end, Ellen sacrifices herself to save the town by giving Orlok the consent he so desperately wanted to feast on her.
I do.
And I love this final shot, with the dying flowers that Ellen despises laid upon her corpse, showing that the people of Wiesburg don't comprehend what she did, seeing an act of heroism as just another tragedy. This leaves viewers with a haunting question. What invisible forces shape our lives, and where are they leading us? Sweet dreams, everyone.